everybody, and welcome to Taking Control, the ADHD podcast on rashpixel.fm. I'm Pete Wright, and right over there is snowbound Nikki Kinzer.
Hello, everyone. I have power.
You have power. Yes, you have power. You are digging out. Your poor dog is too short for the snow.
He's too short. It was really funny. I wish I had video.
Yeah.
I so wish I had video because I was laughing. And then I got in trouble for laughing at our dog.
I don't think your dog cares. Does your dog care?
Everybody's like, no, you can't laugh at him. And I'm like, but he's so funny.
He knows he's funny. Don't worry about it.
Yes, he does.
You're fine.
Yeah, he just didn't know where he was going and how he was going to get out of all of this snow. There was a little look of panic, for sure. But it was great. We have lots of snow. It's fun, but we're safe and everything's good.
Good. That's good. Let's see. I have, before we get started, I have a couple of elsewhere on the internet notes, if I may.
Yes.
I have guested this last week on Luke Barnett's Author Life Chat. If you're into writing, in particular, the structure of your life around writing and as it relates to ADHD, there's a link in the show notes to my conversation with Luke. It's a new YouTube channel. He's very excited about it, and we had a good chat. And then this morning, I did a guest spot on Francesco D'Alessio's Keep Productive Tools They Use podcast, which, as you listen to this, should have gone live, I believe, yesterday. For those in the live stream, it'll be next week. That was also fun, and it was really a conversation around ADHD and the tools, the productivity tools that we that we use and how they work with ADHD and how they don't. And yes, I talk all about simultaneously using multiple to-do apps and the disaster that is my life online. So it was good fun. And so thank you to Luke and to Francesco for inviting me on. And Francesco is going to be back on our show, on the main show, in the coming month or so at some point. We still need to work out the final date, but he's great. So more productivity tools stuff coming soon.
You can never get enough of those.
So true. So true. So we are going to be talking here about paper. Is sort of a part 5-ish of our organizing steps conversation. Before we do that, head over to Take Control ADHD to get to know us a little bit better. You can listen to the show right there on the website or subscribe to our mailing list, and we'll get an email each time a new episode is released. You can connect with us on Twitter or Facebook at Take Control ADHD. The opening question, Nikki Kinzer.
Yes, the opening question. So this was a question about how to deal with letting somebody down. And so this particular person had written in and they had promised to do something for someone, and they forgot. They just forgot, simply just, that's it. They just forgot to do it. She had every intention, but got overwhelmed with my own life, and I didn't put it in my calendar like I should have. I'm not someone that is usually so unreliable, but I'm having a hard time dealing with my forgetfulness and how that affects others. And so the question was really just sort of, how do I deal with this? How do I move on from this? So what do you think?
Well, I'm going to toss it back to you, and because you and I have worked together for a long time, and I know I have let you down in the past, and so
no, you have not.
I'm sure I have on big projects, and I know I have because I don't remember specifics, but I have a visceral sense memory of the feeling of letting you down because I care about you very much, and I really.
So sad.
Oh no, it's not sad. We've moved on. Don't you know?
Right.
We've moved on.
Yes.
We got over it, and we're still together.
Yes, that's true.
But I know this. I know I have the feeling, sort of the emotional memory, much more than the specific memory of being in a space of letting you down and feeling like I made a commitment and I'm not living up to it, and I don't know how to live up to it, and I guess I better just be real quiet and pretend that that it doesn't exist.
You're covering your eyes. You can't see me.
Right. And this is the trick in my to-do app. If I just remove the date due from a task, it'll just disappear. I won't see it.
Yeah.
Like that's a
Until
handy
I
trick.
come knocking.
So it is a soul crushing feeling to know you're letting somebody down. I absolutely get that. So I don't know. Have I learned anything?
This is hard. This is kind of talking about two different things, right? Because what she's specifically talking about was letting a friend down of something that she was going to follow through on. We're kind of talking more of like a work relationship, but maybe they are the same thing. Maybe they're not that different.
I don't think they're that different.
Yeah,
I really don't.
They're probably really not. I think that in her situation, she did try to make up for it. She obviously apologized and explained what happened. And I think that's probably really the most important thing, if coming from maybe a receiving end of it. But really, Pete, I've never felt like, you've.
Well, I'm just really, I'm glad to know that your memory is shorter than mine.
Yeah. Yeah. But what I would say to anyone that's experiencing this is that I think you have to just be transparent about it and be honest. And I do know that one of the things that I do talk about that relates to you and I specifically is that the communication is so important. Yeah. That if you are working on a project for me and it's not coming along as well as you thought, then I want to know that. Like, I want to know the truth, because for me, it's worse to not know what's going on. So you're hiding and then I'm wondering what's going on, and that's frustrating. So I think that the biggest lesson to be learned is just to be transparent about it. And even if it's not what the other person wants to hear, I still think that's better than not hearing anything at all.
Yeah.
So, and in her situation, she acknowledged it. I mean, she fessed up to it. She didn't make excuses. She didn't say anything other than that she simply forgot. She didn't put it on her calendar. And, and I think that you do learn from those experiences. You kind of figure out what you're going to do next time. And somehow you just have to sort of forgive yourself and, give yourself the same grace that you would give somebody else. Right. Yeah. And especially when you're dealing with friends and family, you would hope that they would find that grace. Now, if they don't, then they're probably not the best people to be around you anyway, because especially with ADHD, this is not going to be the first time or probably the last time that something's going to either get forgotten or is going to be a little bit late, because the ADHD doesn't go away. Even if you're managing it perfectly, something could still happen. So you need to have people, that are understanding and supportive around you.
It is an act of great vulnerability to admit that you've failed in some way, right? That you let somebody down, that you have, that you've dropped the ball on something, and I think we're genuinely afraid to do it and don't know how to put words to it, and so it comes from this place of fear and uncertainty, and in my experience, I think if you're open and authentic about how I recognize that I've done this thing, and B, it hurts me genuinely to have done this thing, and I recognize that I didn't pull my weight in some way. I don't have an experience where somebody has come back to me and said, I'm not your friend anymore. Right.
Right.
That's
yeah.
like, that just doesn't happen. And
No.
So you can start from a place of building and construction. Yeah. And I know I forgot this thing because I didn't put it on my calendar. I'm not making an excuse, but I am trying to set a context for why I didn't do this thing. And now I'd like to try to find a way to rebuild. Can I do it now? Is it too late? Can I do something else that would make up for it? Can I just buy a drink? Like, what can I do to help rebuild? And I think that's the important part. Set context and not excuses.
Yeah, absolutely. And move on from it and talk to the person. I mean, I think that when you talk it out and don't just hide it, that helps, or talk to somebody else if you're really struggling with it. But yeah, absolutely. I think that's exactly how I would approach that. The
ADHD podcast is brought to you by you. The reason we can do this show each week, year after year, is thanks to the support of our listeners at patreon.com/the ADHD And you know what? Patreon is fantastic. It has a fun structure that allows us to do, to set goals. If you haven't seen it at the website, you can set these goals for patron support that says if we achieve this goal, we're going to be able to do this next thing that we've been wanting to do for a long time and we've needed support to do it. And we, this week, achieved a major milestone that is, I know, it's just, it's amazing. And it's going to allow us to do something that has been a long time, but probably the longest single request that we've had of the show is to bring about transcripts. We know that transcripts are important. They're important for those who come to the show with a hearing challenge, those who want to be able to read and reference the show, those who want to be able to search for specific topics across a transcript. Transcripts are huge. It's something that that's not lost on us. The myriad needs that people bring to the show asking for transcripts is not lost on us at all. But we want to do it well. We want to do it right. We want human transcriptions. And now, thanks to patron support, we can do that. So our first goal is met. You all, please, you can't know how it feels to be able to do this. And Nikki and I have been talking about our next goal because there are more things we want to do. We just,
right.
We'll keep updating the website and keep posting for these live streams. Patreon.com/the ADHD podcast. Thank you so much for your support. And to those who come after this point, the transcripts that you see on the website are thanks to other listeners. So thank the community for making this work. Patreon.com/the ADHD podcast. Our main topic today, Nikki Kinzer, is part 5-ish. It is not officially one of the steps, but it's definitely part of the series of Organizing with ADHD. We have completed the first 4 steps, and we strongly recommend you go back and listen to those 4 episodes before you begin this one. It sets a foundation for the conversation we're going to have today, getting started with your paper piles.
Yes, so exciting. And something that I want to talk about a little bit before I get right into this is on my website, I have 3 different online courses. One is Organizing Your Space Your Way, and the other one is the Paper Solution, and then the other one is Organizing Time with ADHD. There's such creative titles. I really should get an award for creativity on my titles.
Oh,
I really think that should happen.
Hands down.
But what I want listeners to know, and I know that some of our listeners have already done this, and that's why I want to say, first of all, the people that have purchased these online courses in the last few weeks, and I'm hoping that you were inspired by our podcast. Thank you very much. And I want people to know that they're there. So Organizing Your Space Your Way is the 4 steps that we have been talking about for the last 4 weeks, but it goes into a lot more depth. I mean, it is an online course, and so you get more information, you get feedback from me and from other people taking the course. The Paper Solution is the same thing. It is all about how to organize your paper. It is also on the website. And then Organizing Your Time. I mean, it really is organizing your time with ADHD. But that's really about not all time management because that's so big, but it's really about how to get your to-do list into your calendar to get things done. Mm-hmm. That's the easiest way for me to explain that. When it comes to paper, the reason this is part kind of 5-ish is because it's very similar to the 4 steps of organizing your space, but just a little bit different because we're dealing with these, thin pieces of 8x10 shapes that we have to figure out what to do with. Right. And, although I think that many of us are going more paperless, I don't see the piles of paper or hear about the piles of paper like I used to 10 years ago.
Which was
it's still
significant.
An issue. Oh, it was very significant. Yeah. And it's definitely changed since the time I went into homes and to what I'm seeing now when I'm working with clients online. But it's frustrating. and it adds anxiety. We still get mail, and that's a big thing. So we're going to talk about mail today. All right. So before we talk about the actual paper piles and getting caught up on those paper piles, I do want to recommend a system for your incoming paper. Right. So that's the mail.
Yeah.
So I think that if we can get this set up first and you have a way to already deal with incoming mail, then it's going to be a lot easier to kind of go through that backup, that stuff that's been
the backlog,
piling up.
right.
Exactly. Okay, so most current paper is coming from your mail, but it could also be coming from your kids. It could be coming from organizations that you support or whatever. So what we want to do is create an inbox for your mail and for the other paper that comes in. So you want to have one spot where all of your paper goes to. So this prevents you from putting it in your car, putting it onto the kitchen table, putting it onto the counter or in your office or whatever, right? Because that's what happens is we just kind of drop it wherever it's at.
Right.
And so let's create one spot. It could be a basket, a bin. I know people who have like a little bag that they stick it in, whatever. Then you want to go through it on a regular basis. Now, I'm not going to be the one that tells you to do it daily. I don't know. Do you do your mail daily?
Do I do my mail daily?
Do you look at it daily?
You know what I do? This gets into maybe a little bit more detail that we can talk about later. I have my paperless system. So my mail comes in and I do the sorting, which I know you're about to talk about. And then anything that needs action gets scanned and put into an Evernote folder that's shared with my wife and family, and it's reviewed on a schedule. So I don't do anything with that paper, but I definitely get it into the workflow.
Well, and that's kind of what is, this is the physical paper. So you're talking about how you're doing electronically.
Yeah.
You can also do it, physically and have it all in one spot
right.
and everything. So,
but ultimately, all of our paper that comes in gets recycled essentially the day it comes in. If things are really cranking along, it gets into the inbox. So I live this system. So let's talk about the categories because I'm a big supporter.
Yeah. Well, there's really 3 categories. So, we want to simplify things. You're either going to recycle it or it's going to go into an action type of category, or you're going to go and you're going to reference it. So recycles all the trash and, junk mail and things that you don't want. Action is going to be anything that needs your attention now. And those action papers do need to have a separate place to go. So you're saying on an electronic level, you're putting it into Evernote, and that's where you go to look at your action items, or you're actually probably transferring it then to your to-doist.
Exactly. So anything that needs action. So I have we call it the finance coffee, because my wife and I had this thing where we were touring around Portland coffee shops whenever we talked about our finances. And that was super fun. And so anything that I have a daily mail folder or notebook in Evernote, and all the daily mail goes in there dated as it comes through. And then in our finance coffee, we review any bills, any statements, anything that we need to take action on as a family. We pay the bills, we do all the stuff. Reference stuff also goes into Evernote for me, and that goes into what I call my filing cabinet. And I tag it and I put it in there, and then it's officially reference material. But all of that happens in the process.
Do you keep that into Evernote? Yeah. Is Evernote your reference?
It is.
Online filing cabinet?
Yes. And if there is a task that is associated with that reference note, I put a link from the Evernote note into my Todoist and make the work task out of it. So
perfect.
Yeah, that's it. I hope I'm still doing it right.
It's a nice system, right? You really have kind of, this is what happens when it comes in. Then we meet on a weekly basis. We figure out where it goes, and then you're putting it where it needs to go. And go ahead.
Well, I have a question. I do.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Please.
It's a challenge that I did when I started with this system, and it's a really simple system. This is not, rocket science. But when I started this system, I did not have kids that were receiving mail. And now I have a family where all 4 of us are receiving mail regularly, and I'm seeing new paper piles, sprout up around my house of mail that's not mine or my wife's, because we have a system, but making sure that we're teaching the kids who have no interest in this at all. right? They would rather
Right.
just light it on fire. They don't even care what it says. And so I'm trying to figure out how to make that transition and how to support them as they move into kind of adulthood where they're just going to receive mail. And let me tell you, we're in college season and my daughter's getting a lot of mail. Oh, my goodness.
But, something that comes to mind right away is getting her a separate basket, a separate place for her. So anything that goes to her, especially because I can imagine she's getting a lot of college stuff, to put it, to at least have it in one spot and then work with her to go through it. Like what is she interested in and what isn't she? So if there's schools that she knows that she's not going to even pay attention to, let's recycle that and get rid of it. But yeah, that's a really good point, Pete, because it's sort of a new dynamic, new chapter in your life that as a family that you're going to have to teach her, just like anything else. I mean, when you've taught her how to organize her room in general, it's just another thing that you're going to have to kind of teach her and figure out how she is going to initially want to go back to that when she's ready to start touring and doing all that stuff.
Exactly. And so I feel like that question itself maybe derailed our attacking the paper piles conversation, but it's just something to think about if you also are in this situation. So
absolutely. Well, and for paper that is actually physical paper, and I'm so glad we're having this conversation because people can see both sides. They can see the electronic side and they can see what happens when you have just the regular paper. I recommend a bulletin board to put those action papers in. So if you have an RSVP or you have bills that you have to pay, put a sticky note, put a red sticky note on it, put it on a bulletin board. Out of sight is out of mind. If you do not have that in front of you in some way, you will forget. And so that's why, in my experience, the bulletin board has been, pretty consistently. It works. I mean, it works on a pretty consistent level. Yeah. So that's what I recommend for that. Reference paper, again, is anything that you want to keep, but it just gets filed. You don't need to have it right away. So you're putting yours into Evernote, which is great. If you're going to have a traditional traditional paper, just having kind of a filing cabinet that's going to go into. However, I have to just say, again, keep that very simple. I have 12 folders, January, February, March through December, and anything that comes in that month, that's where it goes. I don't even care what it is. That's just where it goes. So it has one spot to go. So I'm not one to say category, subcategory, subcategory, subcategory. I think we got to make these things easy and simple so that they don't get piled up. You actually have a place for them to go. And better yet, do what Pete Wright is doing. Follow his example and go paperless. The less paper you have, to collect, the better. So online bill paying, all of that stuff, that is not new anymore.
Right. Think about that. When we first did the attacked paper, that was still kind of a new thing. And we didn't have systems for dealing with that and for turning off the paper. Now we do. That's pretty regular.
Bills come through your email. Yeah, they're already paid, and where do they go, and do you need them? I mean, that's the other thing too, is what do you really need to keep and for how long? Well, that's a whole nother podcast, but ask your financial advisor and tax accountant first, especially because so many people have different requirements and things that they have to keep. So definitely, if you're curious about what you need to keep, ask.
And for how long,
those professionals. Right. Exactly. Okay. So now that you've processed your mail, we want to tackle the backlog. We want to go and tackle all of the paper piles that you have, or boxes, banker boxes that you have. And I think the first thing that we want to really go into the project, treating it like it is a project. Yeah. And I know that sounds odd, but do you know what I mean by that? Do you understand what I'm saying?
I think I do. It's, when I think of a project, it's a thing that you invest time into on a schedule and it ends.
Perfect description. And it's not something that necessarily you're going to get done in one day, because it really depends on how much paper you have. Yeah. I have been in hundreds of homes in my professional organizing career. And I have seen, more paper than I've ever seen in my life in one spot. And then I've seen paper piles that just seem pretty normal, but it's really anxiety driven for that person. So everybody's tolerance is a little bit different, and everybody is going to have a different amount of paper to go through. So the project, the time that the project's going to take is going to depend. And it's also, if you do feel like, if you're listening to this podcast because you have a paper issue, then my guess is that it's going to take you longer than just 30 minutes to complete this, right?
Yeah.
Because you wouldn't be listening to this if you didn't think you had a paper problem.
Right.
So you really do want to treat it like a project, pay attention to it, make the time for it. Everything that Pete said is right on. And, I think that it's one of those things that you just want to get started on and keep working on it, box by box. It's going to be kind of frustrating, because you're going to see the paper and you're going to be like, oh my gosh, there's so much to go to, but just keep focusing box on box, pile to pile. Don't worry about it. You're going to get through it.
Well, and I would add that it's a thing of great stress to imagine doing this. But I mentioned a old boss who had a great way of thinking about attacking a paper pile, that you can convert any size paper pile into something that's completely manageable. Just take one piece right off the top and start a new pile. That's all you have to focus on. It's one piece of paper at a time, one decision at a time, as long as you put it on the calendar, as long as you make room in your life to accomplish the goal that you set out to achieve, which is tackling the paper piles.
Yes, intentional planning. You got to keep this project in front of you, because we know that you can get started and then leave it. It's, that's a real high possibility. So we want to be pretty intentional with our time. Decide how often you want to work on this project and make a commitment to your schedule to do so. Schedule your organizing sessions into your calendar. It may be easier for you to be consistent and choose like the same time every day to work on your paper, or the same days. Like you could say, okay, 10 minutes a day right after dinner. But you could also say Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, I'm going to work on my paper for 30 minutes from 5 to 5:30 before I make dinner, right? So you're kind of attaching it to other things, but you're making it easy and simple and not so overwhelming. So there's a lot of flexibility of how you can plan for this, but it definitely takes some attention. Otherwise, what happens?
Nothing.
Thank you. If you weren't going to say that, I was going to do sign language so that you knew what the answer was.
It's just
so I'm so glad
I was trying to insert
minds,
nothing as a metaphor.
Nothing.
Yeah, a silence. Nothing happens.
Good job,
yeah,
Pete.
Thank you. It's like I've been paying attention all these years.
I know. It's fabulous. Okay, so now that you've set the time aside, where do you start? Okay, well, I'm going to do a shameless plug in my online program, the Paper Solution. I suggest collecting your paper first before sorting it. So what I say is that this is where it gets kind of overwhelming. If you have a lot of paper in a lot of different places, and man, I got to tell you, I have seen some really creative places to put paper, like in unused bathtubs.
Oh,
and I mean, all kinds of stuff. So what you got to do is get some kind of container, whether it's a banker box, a bin, bags, whatever, and just go through and get everything together. And at your scheduled time, you're taking a box, or like you said, you take one piece of paper and you just start going through it. The categories of when you're going through backlog are very, very simple. You're basically going to keep it or you're not. Yes or no. It's so simple. And then, the keep pile, once you get through all of that, it's going to be separated into action or reference. Mm-hmm. But I can almost guarantee you that 90% of the time, it's going to be reference paper, not action, because we're talking about backlog.
Right.
So if you come to a piece of paper that had an action item on it, I almost guarantee you probably have missed the date.
Right. If it was a bill, for example, and this, I love this, how they have the 30, 60, 90, 120, like they'll tell you how late you are in paying your bill.
Right.
And so, we run into this occasionally when one of our bills ends up in my daughter's pile for some weird reason,
Yes.
where we'll have gotten it 2 or 3 times. It's the same bill. We just need to go pay it.
Exactly.
The date it's over.
It's not relevant anymore. Exactly.
Right.
So that is typically what's going to happen. And what you're also going to find is with older paper, you're going to have a lot more recycled and shredding. You're not going to keep it. And so that I want you guys, the people that are listening to this, have that as be a little piece of hope for you, like inspiration to actually go through it, because the majority of what is in front of you and what's stacked in front of you, you don't need and you don't need to keep. And so if you can just get rid of it, it's going to be a heck of a easier when you get into, what is it? Step 3. And that's actually organizing the paper and putting it into a file.
Well, and that's why, that goes back to the organizing steps, right? You always do your sort and purge before you organize it, right? Get rid of the stuff you don't need before you spend the time, trying to figure out what to do with it.
That's right. And that's why this is where the two systems really are very parallel, because that's exactly what's happening. A big challenge when sorting paper that I have found with my clients is the fear of regret. What if I need this later? So in some situations, there is paper that you're going to need for tax purposes. Ask your accountant, ask your financial advisor for advice. They're going to know what you need. Most paper outside of memorabilia can be replaced if you absolutely need it back. So let me repeat that. Most paper outside of memorabilia can be replaced. So if you have memorabilia type of paper that you want to keep for a reason, keep it. This is your house. Keep it. I do have a question for you though, Pete, because this came up recently. What if you're a grad student or a teacher, or you've had you've done all this research on getting your, what is it, the thesis, or what is it at the end?
Dissertation.
When you get your So you've done all your research for all of that. What would you suggest to someone as far as what do you do with that? Do you keep it? Do you scan it and put it online? How do you decide what is important to keep?
Okay. Look, I'm the paperless guy, right? So I keep everything. And since most of my research in the research process, and when I was working on my own thesis, that research all lived inside of the digital domain. At the time, I was an early Evernote person, but when I was working on my thesis, I didn't have Evernote, but it was still all, PDFs and selections from resources that I had scanned manually. I had the big scanner and I was scanning books and I was scanning. So all of that had been converted into PDF, even in the early days. The bygone days. So I still have all of that reference information and have found it useful in my teaching to keep all of that stuff. So I'm an advocate for, from the purpose of academia, I'm an advocate of keeping the archive of academic work and personal academic research and keeping it well organized and tagged. Especially if you're in a position of writing a dissertation, you're going to be teaching. And so using those resources as, as something to help you and your professional development to stay on top of the sort of the work that you're doing is key. It's absolutely key. So I keep everything.
Okay. Well, I'm really glad you said that, because that's exactly the person that I have in mind. That's exactly what's happening, is she knows that she's going to need to go back to it because she's going to be teaching it. And so, just to be clear, then your recommendation would be that maybe it would be it would be worth her time then to scan the information, get it into Evernote or something that she trusts, and take the time to tag it and categorize it in that regard, so that when she wants to go back and get it, she can get it just in the computer and not into a banker box.
I absolutely believe that is the right path forward.
And you absolutely trust. I know I'm sounding so old school, but I know there's people probably asking this. You trust that the information, once it gets into your computer, it's safe and you can go ahead and get rid of the hard copies?
Well, yeah, I do.
Okay. I just want to make sure because, you know, people are going to ask.
They do.
They're going to wonder.
They ask all the time. And this is an important question. And, you know, so I'll just say again, I have my computer. I'm a Backblaze customer. And I also, so all of my resources, so Evernote is my digital resource for my digital filing cabinet. All of those attachments, PDFs, they all live in my computer and then they sync to the Evernote cloud server, which again, I trust over the years. I've used since the very beginning, and I trust what they have done. They've never lost data for me. But also that Evernote local archive that I never have to actually see because I interact with it on Evernote, but all of my data is synced in my computer, and then Backblaze backs up my computer right to the cloud. So the entire thing is backed up to the cloud. So I am a big advocate of backups. Make no mistake, I just in case is an important reason, just in case, right? I definitely have, and I'm of the mind that if you don't have two copies of something, you don't have any copies of something, right? Because if you lose the one, you've got none. So all of my data is backed up,
double safe.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's double backed up. And I do have to say, when my computer crashed, everything I had on Evernote and everything I had in Google Docs came back to me immediately.
That's right.
And I lost nothing.
You lost nothing.
So
that is a testament to where we are today, right now. I mean, a lot of these things are figured out. This is settled science.
Right. And it's interesting because I used to save a lot of stuff on like the computer, right?
Yeah.
Like I don't even know what the terminology is, but you make a folder, you file whatever, it's in the computer. Yeah. But if your computer crashes and it's not backed up for whatever reason, but it should be, you would lose those things. But the other things you're not losing because they're in the cloud. So I trust it too. But I just think, it's a good conversation for us to have because there is still a question for a lot of people.
Yeah.
So now we're going back to reference paper. I kind of made a suggestion about this earlier about I have a January through December system. Just keep it simple. Whether you are filing online, which is what we are preferring you to do. We say that out loud. Mm-hmm. Or you're doing it in a traditional filing cabinet or whatever. Just keep your categories simple. Don't think too much about it because that's where people get stuck. And just how are you going to remember if you do need to retrieve the piece of paper for whatever reason? But I got to say, another really nice thing about being online is all you have to do is search for it and it comes up.
Yeah.
So
and that gets to a question that we get occasionally and has come up in the chat room today, which is how do you tag your online resources, your digital scanned paper, to make sure that you can then find it later? And I think that's a great question, and it merits some thought, individual thought, because your system is going to be different than my system. It's going to be different than Nikki's system, which is, for me, if it's a receipt, for example, the reason I'm saving a given receipt is for tax purposes. So I tag it for taxes and then that year, and then it automatically goes into the right place, right? As soon as I tag it, if I search for that tag, I bring up that tag in Evernote, I see all the receipts. But the other benefit of Evernote in particular, and a lot of these online systems now that we didn't have as a benefit early in the early days of paperless, is that these systems will index the text in scanned PDFs, like books and receipts and pages and bills and statements. And so you can actually search in the Evernote search bar, and it will bring up text inside of PDFs. So you can tag broadly and then still find very narrowly a specific restaurant or a specific date or something like that. That's super useful. So that's certainly something to think about. But I tend to tag broadly around general purposes. So taxes and then taxes and the specific year for receipts and statements that I need to keep around, those kinds of scans. For example, I need other category ideas to respond to if there's a specific question, but that's an idea.
Well, and for me, I think that when it comes to like ADHD research, I'll tag it by whatever the research is. So, I may have a file folder in Evernote that's ADHD research, but then I'm going to have, hashtag working memory, hashtag time management, hashtag organization. And so if I'm looking for something that's very specific to that, it's very helpful, especially if I'm going to do a podcast on paper organizing. I didn't do this because I didn't need to, but if I needed to, I could go back and look at, what I have done before, which kind of goes back to the academic piece. Yeah. What have I already written? What have I already done that I could put into this and then put it into a podcast and teach it to the world?
To the world.
Whoever's listening. Yeah. So anyway, the last step I want to talk about is that maintaining step, right? So in organizing your space, it's that fourth step. It's the same thing here in your paper organization. And I'm going to say the same thing. You just have to keep paying attention. You have to have a system in place for incoming paper. You've got to have those steps that you're going to follow through. So think about what that's going to look like for you. Pay attention as soon as you start seeing the paper getting piled up or your basket's getting too big. My basket right now is a mess. I'm going to have to go through it. And then you just continue to do those steps. You sort, you purge, you organize it, you file it. And that's what you do with paper.
Paper doesn't have to be hard. I think often, when you see the volume of paper, if you have a backlog of paper, that can be a thing that sparks fear and anxiety, and it doesn't have to be. It only has to make you as anxious as you let it. So don't worry about what's in it. All you need to know is that the second you attack it, you'll know what's in it, and you'll know there's no reason to fear.
That's right.
Okay. Thank you, everybody, for downloading and listening to this very podcast. I hope this gives you some ideas on how to approach your paper, your giant and fermenting paper piles. On behalf of Nikki Kinzer, I'm Pete Wright. We'll catch you next time right here on Taking Control, the ADHD podcast.